Hello and welcome to Aberone's Armorial. As you may notice, we have an interesting guest with us today, and I would like him to introduce himself. This is Lord Lyon
Well,
King of Arms.
well, hello everybody. My name is Dr. Joe Morrow. I'm Lord Lyon King of Arms, and I'm sitting here in a very cold Scotland in the county of Angus, which is the birthplace of Scotland. Only 10 miles away from me, the Declaration of Arbroath was written. As Lord Lyon King of Arms, I'm responsible to govern a number of aspects of Scottish life, including the heraldry, the genealogy, the state ceremonial. The office itself requires a lawyer to be in the position, and also it goes back into the history of Scotland, well beyond the Union of the Crowns and back into the old Celtic kingdom, where the office of High Shenachie was the one who recited all of the generations of the Scots kings. And it seems throughout all of that historical period that the Lord Lyon has played a role within Scottish society. Today, I've got the responsibilities of state ceremonial, genealogy, and also heraldry within Scotland, but also to promote the great culture that we have in terms of our Scottish heritage, whether it be here in the county of Angus, or whether it be in the United States of America, Canada, Australia, or South Africa, it doesn't matter. And I send my greetings to all of my friends in the heraldic and Scottish field within North America.
Thank you for that introduction. So I guess I'll start off with the first question then, as we're going to do this bit of a Q&A. Have you always been interested in heraldry? And if so, what got you interested in it?
Well, I've been interested in heraldry since I was a wee boy, probably around about 7 years old. And it's a slightly interesting story that my mother was a very strong Episcopalian, and she took us to 8 o'clock Holy Communion and 11 o'clock Matins. And we weren't allowed our breakfast till after we'd made our communion at 8 o'clock. However, at the 11 o'clock Matins, the preacher who was the rector of the parish that we attended was a very dull preacher, and he preached at length. But in the church was a range of the most magnificent heraldry related to local families, related to the Scottish Episcopal Church itself. And my imagination would run, and I would make up all sorts of stories and all sorts of ideas based on this heraldry. None of them, once I learned about the subject, were actually right, but it did manage to get me through some of the most painfully long for a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old sermons that I'd ever had to sit at. So from very early on, I engaged with heraldry, and it became a way of storytelling for me and about capturing Scottish history. It's often referred to as the Garden of Scottish History. Heraldry is the Garden of Scottish History. And for me, that was where my experiences came as a young, bored boy forced to go to church to listen to dull sermons by long-winded clerics. So that was probably over 55 years ago. And I would regard myself continuously over that period to have been a student of heraldry. And you never lose out from the study of heraldry because what it teaches you, but also you never actually get there. One of the things I have most impatience about, and as I get older, I get more and more impatient, are those who are so certain that they're right about heraldry. You'll often hear people say, oh, that's bad heraldry. That means they don't like it. They'll often say that breaches the rules of heraldry, but they've been breached for centuries. And these rules have been created by successive heralds to make a system of heraldry. So it's a long, ongoing, active type of study that we need to bring into our own life and our own century.
Very nice. I never knew that about where you started, where you got interested in that. Um, let's see. What's our next one? What's your favorite part of the job?
Well, it's certainly not listening to long sermons even now. So, but I have to do that. My favorite part of the job, there's probably more than one. I certainly thoroughly enjoy dressing up. I've made no point of, no, I've never made any bones about that. I have more uniforms, chains of office, and bright colors than you could imagine. And I think that what life needs today is a sense of that pageantry, a sense of that ceremony. So for me, that's always a joy. The other great joy for me is to be able to grant people arms for the first time. And in Scotland, it's not about who you are or what your rank is. It's about whether you're a well-deserving and virtuous person. That's the test. And I'm the sole judge of that. So that's a very interesting debate that I have often with myself about if someone is a well-deserving and virtuous person. But to see somebody grow in their understanding of belonging and an identity through the grant of a coat of arms by myself is, I think, one of the most pleasurable things in life to do. And it's a recognition of where they are and what they do, which is recognized by the Crown, the monarch herself, through the offices of the Lord Lyon. So these are my two favorite things. My least favorite thing is to listen to long, turgid lectures on heraldry that actually kill the subject, in my view. Now, I've made that very clear over the years I've spoken, that we need to engage with this subject. We need to make people enjoy it. It needs to be something that's relevant, and that for those who are interested in the peculiarities of, for example, Georgian heraldry in England with regard to its scenic approach, then enjoy it. But for most people, that's a subject that's got of limited interest. And so I'm more keen to make heraldry available to all. And I think that's the Scottish tradition.
Absolutely. I'd agree with you there. That's wonderful. For our next one, how do you manage to keep the traditional sides of your office, building off your last question, how do you balance your traditional roles as Lord Lyon with some of the modern things that you're doing to try and make it more interesting for people, like you said?
One of the things I learned very quickly in life, that when people say that a traditional role, they usually mean just as far back as they can remember. And sometimes the traditional roles were created to meet the time in which they were placed. One of my predecessors, a most magnificent writer and most magnificent structural approach he took to heraldry, was Sir Thomas Innes of Lerney. Sir Thomas wrote at a period when there was a need to put a structure around many aspects of the court of the Lord Lyon. Mm-hmm. But today we need to look at reevaluate whether these actually are the structures that we should do today. So I take a look at the traditions, where we've come, how do we apply them today, and are they relevant? And that's something that requires, I think, experience, and it requires to work collaboratively with people, and actually it requires you to look at how you promote heraldry in today's society. An example of that, which probably would have been not on Sir Thomas's desk, was recently we've had an influx of petitions in the court of the Lord Lyon for community flags. Now, it's very well established that the design of any heraldic achievement in Scotland is the sole prerogative of the Lord Lyon, and therefore that can't be breached. And it's for me to say what it should be and what it shouldn't be. However, with a community flag, how do you gain a sense of ownership by the community in that flag if you don't open it up to the community?
Absolutely.
So I took a view that we should run competitions, and we got entries. The only condition I placed upon it was that the finalists had to all meet the rules of heraldry. So the rules about tinctures, and the rules about charges and where they go, and the rules about non-duplication. I made sure they were all achieved. And at the end of the day, once that had taken place, I was very happy for the finalists that all met the heraldic rules to go to a vote by that community. And then they own the flag. So I suppose that's still interpreting the right of the Lord Lyon to design the heraldic device, but at the same time keeping a control of that through a more kind of collaborative and community way. The other thing is that I wouldn't want a set of arms that weren't mine and I felt comfortable with. So some people would want to have more input than others into what their coats of arms should be. And I think you have to go into that negotiation with them. And I suppose a final thing is to say that designs that were of a past age are maybe not designs that we would use today. And an example of that, which is very clear, is that I'm very unkeen to have any topless person in arms. And that's not because of being a prude. It's about respecting the kind of people, whether they be male or whether they be female. But in the past, there was never any doubt about using that. The other aspect of it, which falls back into the big debate about racism, is that in heraldry, often a savage would be appeared in a non-white color. That's just appalling now. I mean, there's no other way to describe that.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have to accept that's where our history comes from, and but in fact, these rules require to be placed into a modern context. So I would never interpret things in those ways today. But above all, we need to make sure that there is a renewal and a moving forward, a restructuring of what heraldry is to make it relevant today.
Wonderful. I fully agree with you there. And another question for you then, building off of those roles again. What is your relationship with the clans? A lot of people like to think that you are above the chiefs, and everything I have read says it's exactly the opposite. So, where does your role usually sit with the chiefs and the standing?
Well, one of the things I should say that there is a great Scottish phrase, which is that we're all Jock Thompson's bairns. And some of you won't know what that means, but it really means that there's a strong sense of equality within the values of Scottish life. So I would never see myself as being above anyone. And I think that's very important for everyone to take seriously, that we meet on the level, eye to eye, but we have different functions to play. My function with regard to the clans is various. One of them particularly is that when a chief inherits a clan chiefship, I record the arms of that chief against his name. So he becomes the chief of the name and arms of Hay, for example. And that recognizes him as the chief of the arms, and that gets recorded into the public registers in Scotland. The other area is that once a clan has lost its chief, then the modern approach is to hold a family convention. Mm-hmm. Now, by law, by common law and practice, the Lord Lyon has overseen those. And what happens is he appoints a supervising officer to see that the procedure of choosing a commander for that clan, and that commander's role is to search out to see if there's a genealogical chief, is done fairly and transparently. And it's not based on who shouts most, who has the most money, or who can actually manipulate most. And that's very important for me, because that would go back to the question I would say, the comment that I made at the beginning of the question about we're all Jock Thompson's bairns. Just because someone thinks they've got their hands on a lever doesn't entitle them to anything. So that's one of the regulations that the Lord Lyon does. The other thing is that sometimes I'm asked to interpret procedures and practices. And of course, the great writer in this field was Sir Thomas Innes of Lerney, and he wrote a number of practices and procedures about how clan activity should be. The classic one is, you know, three eagle's feathers for the chief, 2 for a chieftain, and 1 for an armiger. And of course, I had made a crack at a conference I attended to say there was a four-feathered chief. And I was asked, who was that? And I said, well, you tell me. And one said, Her Majesty the Queen. And I said, no, the four-feathered chief is the chief's wife. And I didn't get that reaction. They thought I was serious. So it was one lesson to make sure that my humor was completely explicit when I was in clan settings. But I suppose that there is a kind of, without being over energetic about it, a kind of guidance and regulatory role of the Lord Lyon within the clan structure. And as the diaspora, which is a magnificent body in itself, that keep alive huge aspects of Scottish heritage. And I've got great admiration for the work that's done in other various parts of the Scottish diaspora. We've got to watch that it doesn't become too wild, that it's kept within the boundaries. And so a bit of guidance from the Lord Lyon's office is often requested on that.
Absolutely. Understandably so. Well, I think there's only one more proper way to round this out, since we talked about other people who have written in the predecessors and heralds. So what do you have advice for the aspiring heralds and artists, the new generation of heraldry, my generation and younger?
Well, let's capture that phrase that said that Scottish heraldry is the garden of Scottish history, and that could be implied further on that it's the garden of the Scottish diaspora. So first of all, use your imagination. Secondly, I would suggest to you that you'll learn what the rules are, because there is no point in producing heraldry that's going to bring into disrepute the actual designs in terms of the rules. The rules are there for a very strong purpose, and the rules are there, for example, so that heraldry can be identified and people can read it. If you could imagine, if you painted a red shield and you put the head of a red-headed man on it, it would look like a bald man from a distance. So the idea of putting color on color, as a rule, to kind of prohibit that, is there for identity. So these rules are there to make things stand out. In Scottish heraldry, we have probably three basic principal rules. One is we follow the family name. So if you're a MacDonald, you're more likely to have some of the MacDonald arms in your coat of arms. Secondly, we personalize it around yourself. So if you were, for example, a lawyer, one of the classic ways of representing that is by the black sleeve or monch. And then the other thing is that we try to keep it simple. That's often called the fridge magnet test. If you can't read a set of arms on a fridge magnet, they're maybe too complicated. But obviously, the complicated coat of arms that we do have with the quartering and grand quartering tell the story of that family, and I wouldn't like to see that lost. But those principles apply to actually to simple heraldry of new grants to new individuals based on their family name. The other thing I would suggest is that you talk to other people and other heraldists about it. There are in essence a very active network of people interested in heraldry. They're always prepared to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Always prepared to talk about it. And then some of the source material is well worth looking at. Some of the dictionaries of heraldry, Scots Heraldry by Thomas Innes. There's a great little book by Mark Dennis, who's an American but a former herald here in Scotland, called Simple Heraldry. Lots of great stuff to be able to actually read. But one of the things I would suggest to you is that there needs to be a combination of enjoying your heraldic activity, but also being prepared sometimes just to push the boat out, to use imagination, to be unapologetically brave about expressing heraldry in a particular way. And these are the kind of suggestions I would give to new heraldists and also to those who are developing the subject.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful advice. Well, I thank you for having. I thank you for coming onto the channel and talking. I'm sure it'll be very well received. Many people were anxious about this when I announced that you were coming on. So, with that, I think that rounds up our interview. If there's anything else you have.
No, other than to say, I hope the anxiety wasn't to do with what I was going to say. but just to say, I'm very happy to come along and any time to talk about this. I'm very happy to do a question answer session, and I try to publish at least once a year in the Double Treasure, which is the Heraldry Society of Scotland, an article that kind of explores these subjects. So all the best to you, and thank you for the interview, and thank you for your interest in Scots heraldry.
Thank you, sir. And that's all from us today. Thank you all who enjoyed it and came along to watch. Thanks.